All right, so can you make passive income owning franchises? And if so, how do you do it? Now, given that I have been a multi-unit franchise owner with one location 2,500 miles away, literally on the opposite side of the country, and then eventually owning another one that was about 150, it was about 200 miles away, I have a really strong opinion on this. There's a lot of misinformation out there on if you can make passive income owning franchises. I'm going to break it down in this video. I'm going to really reveal things that people aren't telling you and really the truth, which you need to know. So let's get into it. Okay, so let's dive into this passive income thing. So my very first franchise, we owned a store that wound up being 2,500 miles away, as I mentioned, and owned it like that for over 2 years. And in that 2 years, I only physically went to the store 3 times. I think one of those times was when I sold it. So the answer to if you can own a franchise as a passive income is sort of. Let me explain why that is. So in franchise terminology and speak, they call it, as opposed to like passive income, they call it semi-absentee or absentee. So semi-absentee is like you're involved in the business, but like part-time, maybe 10, 15 hours a week, whatever it is. Absentee is pretty much you are not involved at all in the day-to-day of the business at all. You pretty much got someone running it and it's running on autopilot overall. That was pretty much where we got to with the California store. We got to the point where I was pretty much absentee. My store manager was running it, and all I did was do a 1 hour check-in call with him weekly. Outside of that, we didn't really connect unless something was going wrong or unless he had a question about something or had to fire someone or something like that. So let's rewind for a second and because what's important is how did we get there? Because most people think, oh, let me open up a business, let me open up a franchise that can own it passive and still, whatever, work my job, all those different things. And I think, honestly, this is a little bit of a pipe dream that, unfortunately, a lot of franchisors promote. There's a lot of franchise brokers and franchise consultants, and a lot of them know that overall it's and is just not the reality of what will happen. So I want to give you the straight talk of how I got there, because the backstory is important. And then I'll lay it all out for, hey, if eventually you want to be a passive owner or an absentee owner, what does that look like and how you do it? Let me just caveat with this first, which is over the years, I've started to surround myself with more and more entrepreneurs and meet entrepreneurs that are way more successful than me. And one of the common things that I see with some of the most successful entrepreneurs that I know is that they are very actively involved in their business, or at least for the first, 5, 6, 7 years. Like, they enjoy working, they enjoy their business, so they're not trying to be absentee. And part of the reason why their businesses wind up running so well and being so profitable is because they are so involved. Hey, so I recently put together a list of 5 low-cost franchises that make $1 million or more. If you want to see that list, then click the link below in the description or go to franchiseempire.com/low cost. Let's get back to the episode. Let's rewind. So my wife and I, we've signed our first franchise agreement in 2015. And when we signed our first franchise agreement, the shopping center that we signed a lease in a few months later was a dirt lot. Like, literally, there's no irrigation in the ground. Like, it was just a plot of land. So it took the developer over 2 years to get it all built out. So we signed our franchise agreement March of 2015. We didn't start our build out until about mid-August of 2017. So about 2.5 years later, that's when we started the build out. Like, finally, the building and the shopping center was built, and then we had to build out a store to make it look like a store. We then wind up opening November 2017. What happened was, between that time, that 2.5 years of signing our franchise agreement, my wife and I decided we don't want to live in California anymore, that we wanted to move back to the East Coast, to be on the coast where our family was. A lot of my wife's family is in Florida, and and we wanted to go start our own family. And so we were now left with this dilemma of, we got this store that we're building out, we're about to start construction on, and we're going to move. And so I had never run a business like this before. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. All I had was a trail of failed businesses in my wake of starting, different things, landscaping business, t-shirt business, MLM businesses, ebook publishing, everything that you can imagine. And I had promised my wife we wouldn't fail. I'd taken out a $300,000 home equity line of credit on our home in order to get this thing up and running. So failure wasn't an option. So I tried to sell it, but it's hard to sell a business that isn't built yet. So it wasn't able to sell it. And it was like, all right, I guess I'm going to have to make sure that I'm going to have to put us in a position to run this thing remotely. Fortunately, I guess it was a blessing in disguise. I'm just realizing this now. Our house took a long time to sell. It took like a year to sell, because we were up in the mountains, 5 acres. It was like a kind of a very unique buy, and we had it overpriced. I decided that, well, since we're going to move across the country and I'm going to have to leave my job anyways, let me just leave the job, oversee the store getting built and getting it up and running properly. So that's what I did. So this is where the caveat comes in, tying this back to making passive income. Fast forward, a year after that of opening the location, I'll tell you what went into that is, yes, okay, eventually I wound up becoming a passive owner, but here's what it took. I did not need to oversee the construction because that was pretty much turnkey. We had a great general contractor who had built 50 of our same exact stores over the year, and he owned one too. So that I didn't really need to build out, but I was full-time ready to rock and roll, overseeing the business as we went and got open. So I personally hired all of the staff in the beginning. I personally interviewed all of them. I personally reviewed all of the resumes. In that first couple weeks, the first week of being in the store, I was in there from open to close. So we were opening at 7 a.m., closing at, I think, 8 p.m., and so I was there at, 6 a.m., leaving at 9 p.m. So what is that? 12, like 13, 15-hour days. That was the first week, right? Like I was there all the time. And here's the thing. For folks that are experienced operators, like I didn't need to do that. That was the interesting part. I didn't need to do that, but I had never run a business like this before. I had never hired a manager. I'd never been in the food business. So I really didn't know exactly what I was doing, but this helped me to learn the business. So then when I'm managing it from across the country later on, I know how things are supposed to go. Eventually, some of the shift leaders that I hired promoted one to manager, promoted one assistant manager. I would say within about a month or so, like I'd go play golf during the day. Like I wasn't there every hour, but I was very actively involved in the store. I was going to the store every day. Sometimes I would just sit in the back of the store and work just so my presence could be there. I was on the staff in the operations, like white, as my mom would say, like white on rice. And so I was very OCD in type A about how I wanted the store run, how I wanted things handled. And so what happened was we were top 10 in the franchise system in mystery shops. We were top 10 in audits by the franchisor. I believe there were only 4 stores in the whole system out of about 90 stores at the time that ranked in the top 10 for both of those categories. So operationally, we were in the top 5% of all run stores. Now, we weren't in the top yet in sales because you had stores that have been open 10 years, right? And we were open just, 6 months. But even that, just 6 months later, because of some of the things we had done in that store, the franchisor, and just because of how engaged I was, they asked me to be on the top franchisee panel at our annual conference, which is crazy. I hadn't owned the store more than 6 months, so that was pretty cool. About 8-9 months later, we moved to Florida, and that's when that began running the store semi-absentee. And so I slowly gave my manager more and more responsibilities and duties. Like in the beginning, he didn't do payroll. I still did payroll, right? Like that was something I still oversaw. Eventually, he did payroll. He did all the hiring and firing. They would just have to send me the new employee onboarding paperwork. Like we had a system, we had a checklist, but it took me being very active and involved in the store for that first 8 months or so. And I don't know that if I would have done that I would have been able to run it passively. The other thing is some businesses are just probably not a passive type business. the food business is probably one of the simpler businesses to run from a passive perspective, right? I think the problem that most people face is that what happens is right now is that you're thinking, I want to own a franchise passively, and the franchisor is selling you that dream, and it's a mismatch of expectations, right? You see where I'm going with this? Because you're thinking, I want to go in and work as little as possible and make as much money as possible. And it's just probably not going to happen that way in the beginning. It takes time. It takes time. I say it takes about 3 years for a business to reach its maturity. And if you've never run a business before, if you've never hired a manager and a team and led them in that way, or oversaw the looking at KPIs and scorecards and doing reviews, like if you don't have that under your belt, it's going to be really hard to run a business passively. And then if you don't have the experience of knowing what should happen in the business and how the different roles work overall, you don't know when things are going wrong. You don't know what mistakes to look for. You sort of don't know when things are going well. That's when people get in trouble and they don't know what's happening in their business, right? And then someone leaves or gets fired, and all of a sudden they find this wake of a mess that's going on because there was no oversight, there was no accountability, and you didn't know how to run the business overall, which is a huge problem. Going to our store, the intention was not to run it passively. That was not the intention. I was going to keep my job, yes, but I would be involved in the store. The store was 10 minutes from our house. I didn't go in thinking I want to work as little as possible and make as much as possible. So I think if that's your intention, you're probably doomed for failure, and you probably should not do it. What your expectation should be is, I'm going to work my tail off for the first year to 2 years. Because, okay, everyone sells the dream of work less in business ownership. The reality is, in the beginning, you will work more. You can eventually get to the point of where you work less and you have more flexibility and lifestyle, etc. Here's the thing though. Early on, I wanted to start a business because I want to make a lot of money. I want to have nice cars. It was like all this materialism, external driven things being, 15, 20 years ago, right? Being an 18-year-old guy now with a family and a wife, 2 kids. Like, yes, I still want material things. I just actually bought a Range Rover Sport SVR, which is a 550 horsepower Range Rover, which is just incredible. The growl just sounds super cool. Yeah, I like those things, but that's not what drives the decision and the intentions overall. So back then I'm thinking I want to be able to live the beach lifestyle and have a business where someone's running it and just sit back and make passive income. Most of the time, the concept of passive income is a myth overall, again, in the short term. And so what happens is, when I was working in the corporate world and I did not enjoy my work, so you may be in a situation right now where you're thinking, I want to work less, because you're not in love with what you're doing. When you own a business where you love the business, you may not love all aspects of it. You never will. But when you're just excited and you're like, man, I own this business, I really just enjoy this overall, you're not trying to work less. That's not a goal anymore. It's really, I think what you really want is flexibility. What you really want is control over your time. What you really want is to be able to do what you want when you want, to not ask for time off. That's really what you want. And so when you get that, your goal isn't anymore to not work as much, if that makes sense. Hopefully this is making sense. Your mindset, going back to working your tail off, your mindset is, first 2 years, I'm going to work more, because especially if you're keeping your full-time job and starting and owning a franchise, you're going to have your full-time job and you're going to be operating the business. So you're going to work more. And so what you want to do is go as hard as you can in that first 1 to 2 year to get things ramped up as quickly as possible. And then once you have a target in terms of when you can go full-time in your business, maybe the target is not fully replacing your income. Maybe it's, okay, once I hit 60, 70% of my income replaced, then I can go full-time. Once you do that, you can, in theory, your business will start to perform better because you're putting more time and energy into it, overseeing different things, etc. And so that could be the goal or plan. So I think that's the best way to approach it overall in order to go passive, right? So let's talk about what is needed in order to actually get to the point where you're running your business pretty much absentee. Number one, the most important thing that you'll need is an operator or manager, right? There's a couple ways that you can do this. You could hire a manager, give them a profit share. They need to have some sort of incentive, right? The managers need to be incentivized, not just have a pure salary, but they need to have an incentive based on what it is that you're wanting them to accomplish in the business. So as an example, my manager, I built out my own quarterly incentive program for him that was based on hitting a certain percentage of labor cost. I wanted our labor cost to be 25% or lower. I wanted our food cost, I think, to be about 25% or lower. And I wanted us to have a certain amount of reward activations, meaning people signing up for our loyalty program, like when you enter your phone number or scan the key card or whatever. And we wound up being number one and we would toggle between number one and number two in the entire franchise system with loyalty signups. Now, part of that was we were a new store, but we were really aggressive and I had those guys trained. I created scripts for them. I would test them on the scripts. So this is what being an owner operator does, right? You can get things running tight like a well-oiled machine. Anyways, back to what you need is you definitely need a manager. They've got to be incentivized on key metrics that you want them to hit. So typically you want one for sales, you want one around customer experience or reviews or satisfaction, you want some around marketing, etc. So you design that. It's important that you hire a manager that can work well with people, because in your absence, other team members in your business will either stay or leave solely because of the manager. If everyone's butting heads with the manager, the turnover can be just absurd. It can just be insane. So what you want to do is hire a manager that has great people skills. Now, when I had my manager at my initial store, he wasn't the best with people skills. He was a young guy. He was like 23, 24 years old at the time. So he just didn't have that experience under his belt or how to navigate and deal with that. And so there was a little bit of a wake at times left behind with some conflict that would happen. And so that was something that, I had to get involved with or deal with, or we'd have turnover, etc. But you're never going to get the perfect manager, right? So it's really about the overall pros and cons for the manager. Overall pros and cons, right? As long as they have 80% of what you need, then you're good to go, right? You can start to train and develop on certain skill sets. Here's what is required: trust and integrity. If you can't trust your manager, and not because you're just paranoid, which in the beginning I was a paranoid, what do they call it? Micromanager, right? And that's just because I was scared. That typically comes out of fear, right? When the owner or whoever is not trusting. We had $300,000 into this investment into the franchise out of our home. So if I had to micromanage, I was going to micromanage. I didn't care. This was going to work. I didn't care what I had to do. Hey, so our team looked into a few hundred franchises and put together a list of 5 low-cost franchises that all make $1 million or more, and the ones that have a proven track record of both profitable and happy franchisees. If you have a net worth of at least $150,000 and you want to see if the territory you want is still available for any of those franchises, then you can go to franchiseempire.com/check territory. All right, let's get back to the episode. But as we got going, as I developed trust in my manager, different things like that, we had all of our shift leaders had access to the safe, and they were equipped to make bank deposits and cash drops, right? So we got the night drop bags that are these secure plastic bags. They would go deposit at the bank, but we had checks and balances in place to review those things. They would have to do a cash log of all of our petty cash. And we had the point of sale reports that would say how much cash we received in the day. I would input that manually into a report. That was one of the things that I would do. So I'd be able to see on a day-to-day basis, hey, we took an X number of cash, but this is how much that got deposited. What happened here? And we didn't have any issues there. Not at that store. Man, at the other store, Yeah, that was a fun thing overall. Anyway, so you have to trust your manager. That's super important. And then you as an owner, what you need to do is learn how to delegate. Most of us haven't run a business before. And even if you've been in the corporate world, managing a team is different when it's your own business and you've got hundreds of thousands of dollars in loans at risk. Learning how to properly and effectively delegate and go, okay, what is my role? What's the role of my manager? And what I recommend is the manager that you hire, you want to hire some of your weaknesses, right? So if you're really good at sales and marketing, you want to hire someone that's strong in operations. If you're strong in operations, you want to hire a manager that is good in sales and marketing. And then you need to create systems. So like we had, a scorecard overall where I would meet with the manager weekly. Okay. And we would measure what was the labor at? What was our food cost at? And how many rewards members did we get for that week? And we would measure against those things. And so that weekly meeting was key. What I noticed was if I ever had a time where I got lax and I canceled our weekly meeting or we missed one or two in a row, that's when problems would happen. That's when we start getting customer complaints. So the more that you're on it as an owner and have that short check and balance in place, the more you're going to be able to run your business as an absentee, semi-absentee owner successfully. So if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe. We do some solo podcasts like this where I give you the ins and outs of everything you need to know about buying, running, owning, scaling your franchise empire. We also have epic podcast guests on here who have built huge franchise empires. We've had people who have owned 30-something Dunkin' Donuts. We've had someone on here who's owned 30-something Sonic franchises. We've had people that run $5 million a year home service-based franchises. Just some really, really epic stuff. So make sure to subscribe, hit the like button. Let me know what you thought about this episode, if there's any topics that you want to see, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the next one.